One time, some time ago, a friend of mine did something that surprised me. I guess you could say it even hurt me or offended me. And rather than bring it up to him and share with him how it made me feel, I just tried to forget about it, sweep it under the rug, so to speak. No surprise then that, frankly, this isn't someone I really speak to or hang out with anymore. And while that's regrettable, it's not really the worst thing ever because, this was just an early school friendship from years ago. Maybe we can all think of someone like that in our lives. But it's so much more difficult, isn't it, whenever it's family? The offense, the wrongdoing, whatever it was, can just cut deeper. And when it's a family member, there's a greater sense that the brokenness needs to be healed, repaired. Family gatherings, holidays, whatever it might be, it's just not as feasible to try to go on in a situation with a family member where there's just ongoing brokenness and the ongoing need for it to be restored. And, that doesn't stop us from trying, though. It's easier to sweep it under the rug, to ignore, to write off, to move somewhere else, whatever, rather than confront the person, rather than engage in the necessary conflict that will help move the situation forward. It can be rough in the church, too. Probably no surprise to most of us that even us good church folks, once offended, will tell our friends and our supporters. We will publicly share our concern in a prayer request. We'll triangulate the person, working through another individual to raise our grievance so that we can remain anonymous. We too will do just about whatever other than what Jesus has told us to do. And the result, of course, like anything else where we don't listen to Jesus, is it makes the situation so much worse. Our culture revolves around this kind of cycle, this fame and shame cycle. It's all about looking good, and whenever someone wrongs us, making sure they look as bad as possible, that they suffer. Doesn't always matter so much. Our viewpoints, it doesn't matter so much if they are morally or factually right, just as long as they're liked by enough people. That's kind of where we're at. So, if we in the church don't forgive or heal, then who on earth is going to do it? If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother, but if he does not listen, take one or two others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I say to you, whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, if 2 of you agree on earth about everything or anything they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am among them. Where 2 or 3 are gathered. That's one of those we hear all the time. But we don't always remember that this is where it comes from. It's not in a passage about worship, but in a passage about church conflict. Conflict resolution in the church. Wherever those 2 or 3 witnesses are gathered in the conflict resolution, that is where Jesus is present among them. Of course, Jesus is present in worship too. Just this is where that comes from. But notice the purpose of the 2 or 3. Jesus says bring some witnesses, not for the purpose of winning a lawsuit, but in order to win back the one who has offended us. That's the whole point of this confrontation, to regain, the Greek says, to gain or to earn the one who wronged you. Maybe that's why the NIV might put this best, to win your brother over. This isn't about getting even. It's not about putting the offender in his or her place. It isn't about punishment. It's not about winning the argument. It's about winning a person. It's about rebuilding that broken relationship. That's the goal here, and it is not possible without the truth. Two men lived in a village, and they had this terrible dispute that they just could not get over. They couldn't resolve it. So they decided to talk to the town sage. The first man went to the town sage and told his version of what happened. And when he finished, the sage said, "You're absolutely right." The next night, the second man went to the town sage and told him his side of the story, and the sage responded, "You're absolutely right." Afterward, the sage's wife scolded her husband. She said, "Those men told you two completely different stories, and yet you told them both that they are absolutely right. That's not possible." The sage turned to his wife and said, "You're absolutely right." We don't like hearing the truth about ourselves, do we? We don't like it at all, and so we don't like telling the truth about other people too, at least to their faces, especially when the truth is that you have hurt me, you have offended me, you've sinned against me. But Jesus is clear that this is the first step. Point out the fault. We live in a time when you're not allowed to judge anybody, which is, couldn't be farther from what Jesus actually said. We have to make judgments every single day. Just don't make hypocritical judgments. But you got to point out the fault. Point it out. Directness. Now, not haughtiness, not self-righteousness, but tell the person who wronged you exactly what they did. But then be ready to contend with that person. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Maybe there's a different perspective. Maybe their wrong is related in some way to something you shouldn't have said or done. In my experience, that's why people often don't like to confront their offender or wrongdoer. It's because in that confrontation, sometimes they know that they themselves might not be as innocent as they thought, or that the wrongdoer is not as guilty as they want them to be. Notice Jesus doesn't say that the witnesses are there to gang up on the offender or to support a certain side. No, instead, Jesus seems to envision a situation where the witnesses weigh everything that is said, not only by you, but also by the person you're confronting. They're there, those witnesses are there to evaluate not just your side, but every word. Now, maybe you have been recently offended or wronged in some way. Jesus says the ball is in your court. It's your responsibility to seek reconciliation. Step 1, you and the person. Step 2, you and a couple of brothers and sisters, obviously ones who can be impartial. Don't bring your best buddy. Everybody knows what he's going to say. Now, maybe you have managed to get to step 3. Unlikely, because I feel like if we do it the way Jesus prescribed, that it doesn't have to reach this point. But maybe you have. Maybe you have followed all these steps and you're ready to treat that person like a Gentile and a tax collector. Hey, that sounds great. But how did Jesus treat Gentiles and tax collectors? Well, Jesus heals the daughter of the Canaanite woman. He eats with sinners and tax collectors. He heals the centurion's servant. He tells a tax collector to be his disciple. He tells only two people that we know of that they had great faith. Both of them were Gentiles. Jesus repeatedly invited tax collectors and Gentiles into the fellowship of the kingdom of God. And you know, the church is supposed to be a community that never gives up on each other. We're not to push people away simply because they're difficult or annoying or wrong or sinners. There wouldn't be anybody left if we did that. Jesus doesn't desire excommunication. Gentiles and tax collectors, when you think about it, they weren't literally kicked out, knocked out of Jewish society. They just weren't a part of it, either because of birth or because of a decision they made to not be included. Yeah, and an unrepentant sinner can effectively remove him or herself from the community and become an outsider, but the community is to always regard the outsider as someone included within the mercy of God. We must continue to pray and hope that the person will return. We must never fail to extend love. We must always offer the possibility of confession, forgiveness, restored relationship. How many times? Well, right after our passage, Jesus says 70 times 7. And just before our passage today, Jesus says, just like the shepherd, he talks about going out in search of the one lost sheep. The church is to continually seek restored relationship. We are to be the visible witness of the steadfast love of God. We can't give up on each other because God has not given up on us. Maybe maybe you've recently been the offender or the wrongdoer. Well, important for you to remember that God does not give his people the power to discern, to admonish, to bind or loose, it says, to point out the fault because we always get it right. No, Lord knows we don't always get it right, but because we are a people who know how to admit it when we've gotten it wrong. And hey, maybe this time, whatever you're thinking about right now, whatever situation, maybe you did get it wrong, and now is the time to own up to it. Doing the right thing, that's great. But confession, forgiveness, now that's the stuff. Those are the things that by God's grace shape us into the community God calls us to be. Confession, forgiveness, restored relationship. Now, you might remember the time Jacob, that trickster, cheated Esau out of his father's blessing. Instead of getting upset, remember what Esau says, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. And this prompts Jacob to say, no, please, if I found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God now that you have received me favorably. Friends, the face of God was seen in the one who was wronged and yet still chose relationship over estrangement. Who else does that sound like? Of course, to say that Jesus was wronged would be quite the understatement. And yet, he still chooses relationship with you and me. As the body of Christ, we are invited to model that kind of forgiveness and love. If we don't, who on earth will?